Police dog refuses to eat or drink. Handler panics until vet makes a life-saving discovery. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Please hit the subscribe and like if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. Michael, in full uniform, face wet with tears, holding a steel bowl beneath Maya's drooling chin, while Dr. William M. Green stands behind them with a loaded syringe. Maya refuses to drink. She turns her head and presses it into Michael's chest. Green watches her drool pool, not from thirst, but from a pain response triggered by the embrace. He lowers the needle. "This isn't organ failure," he whispers. "Something else is wrong." The call that broke the morning. It started with a full bowl. Michael noticed it on a Tuesday, Maya standing over her food, nose down, sniffing once, then simply walking away. He didn't panic. Dogs skipped meals. He refilled her water, tossed her a piece of jerky from his jacket pocket, and told himself it was nothing. By Thursday, it was something. She hadn't touched the water bowl in 2 days. Her movements had slowed to a careful, deliberate plod, not the stiff gait of an aging dog, but the measured steps of something trying very hard not to hurt. Michael scheduled a department vet check for Friday morning and spent Thursday night watching her from across the kitchen, pretending to read. The call came Saturday at 6:17 a.m. He knew from the tone before the words arrived. The veterinary liaison spoke in the careful, flattened voice people use when they've delivered this particular news before. Deterioration consistent with multi-organ failure and aging canines. A phrase so clinical it barely sounded like a death sentence. "We recommend you make her comfortable. You have about 48 hours to say your goodbyes." Michael thanked him, set the phone face down on the counter, stood in his kitchen in the early gray light for a long time. That night, he didn't take the couch. He didn't take the bed. He grabbed a blanket, walked to Maya's kennel in the back room, lowered himself to the floor, and leaned against the wall. Maya crossed the kennel slowly and settled her head into his lap with a heaviness that felt like trust and grief combined. He stroked her ears in the dark. Neither of them slept. Neither of them needed to pretend they weren't afraid. A room that smelled like goodbye. The clinic opened at 7. Michael was in the parking lot by 6:40, engine running, neither moving nor willing to move. Maya lay across the back seat with her chin on the armrest, watching him in the rearview mirror the way she always did. Steady, patient, present. He got out. He opened the rear door. And for the first time in 6 years of partnership, he didn't give her the command to jump down. He just reached in and lifted her himself. She let him. The waiting room hit him before he reached the door. Through the glass, he could already see them. Officers in uniform, officers in civilian clothes, a dispatcher he recognized from the night shift still wearing her headset around her neck, like she'd walked straight out of the building the moment she heard. 8 people, maybe 10, all of them finding somewhere else to look the moment he pushed through the door. Nobody spoke above a murmur. Sergeant Briggs stood by the water cooler in the far corner, the same man who had once slapped the hood of Michael's cruiser after a drug bust and said, loud enough for the whole precinct to hear, "Maya's the only real cop in this department." He was facing the wall. His shoulders were moving in the slow, controlled rhythm of a man trying very hard to keep himself together in a room full of people he respected. He was losing the battle. Michael kept his jaw locked and his eyes forward. He checked in at the front desk with his name and Maya's badge number. His voice came out even. Professional. He was a police officer. He would not break. Not yet. Not here. Not until there was no other choice left. The making of a team. 3 years earlier, Maya had been somebody else's problem. The K-9 selection report was blunt, too reactive, handler-resistant, unplaceable in standard deployment. 2 experienced trainers had already returned her to the program. The third had requested a different assignment altogether. By the time Michael saw her, Maya was living in the back kennel at the regional training facility, the dog nobody wanted, pacing a rectangle into the concrete floor with the focused intensity of something that hadn't been given enough to do. Michael watched her for 20 minutes without approaching. Then he sat down cross-legged outside her kennel gate, opened a paperback, and read. He came back the next morning and did the same thing. And the morning after that. He didn't reach through the gate. Didn't offer food. Didn't speak to her in the bright, performative voice handlers sometimes used with difficult dogs. He simply existed near her, quietly, consistently, without agenda. On day 11, Maya laid down on her side of the gate while he read. He didn't react. He turned a page. The trainers thought he was wasting department time. His supervisor suggested he cut his losses and select a different animal. Michael nodded politely and came back the next morning. 6 weeks in, he clipped her lead for a standard yard exercise and began walking. Halfway across the field, without a hand signal or a spoken command, Maya drifted left and settled into perfect heel position beside his left knee. She looked up at him once, then forward. Michael kept walking, kept his expression neutral, didn't say a word. But something locked into place in his chest that morning, quiet and absolute, the specific certainty of a man who has just found exactly who he was looking for. The night she stepped in front of him. The warehouse on Delman Street had been condemned for 3 years. The fugitive, a violent offender with 2 outstanding warrants and nothing left to lose, had chosen it specifically for that reason. No clean sight lines. No predictable floor plan. Walls that had been rotting from the inside long enough that nothing structural could be trusted anymore. Michael remembered the sound before anything else. The crack of a boot connecting with a compromised wall panel, sharp and explosive, like a gunshot in a narrow space. Then the eruption. A section of the partition gave way in a burst of shattered concrete, corroded rebar, and 6 years of accumulated debris. He never saw the fragment coming. Maya did. She was 2 steps ahead of him on the lead. Then she wasn't. She was simply there, between him and the trajectory of something jagged and fast-moving. And then she hit the ground hard on her left side, with a sound Michael had never heard her make before or since. One yelp. Sharp and brief. Then silence. She was back on her feet in under 4 seconds. She completed the apprehension. She walked to the transport vehicle under her own power, sat at Michael's left knee during the debrief, and accepted a scratch behind the ear when it was over. The incident report noted a minor abrasion to the neck area. Superficial. No follow-up required. Michael had believed it because she gave him no reason not to. Because she showed him nothing, not a flinch, not a favor, not a single morning where she moved like something inside her was broken. She had protected him completely. right down to protecting him from the truth of what it had cost her. Lower the syringe. Right now. Dr. Green hadn't moved toward the injection port yet. He was watching Maya. Specifically, he was watching the way he was holding her neck, the almost imperceptible stiffness in the angle of her head, the way she kept her chin slightly elevated even while pressing into Michael's shoulder. 20 years of practice had trained him to notice the things animals couldn't say out loud. Something was nagging at him. "Hold her still for me," he said quietly, firmly, "but don't restrict her head." Michael tightened his arms around Maya's midsection. Green pulled on a fresh glove and began applying careful, measured pressure, starting at the base of her skull, moving slowly down the column of her neck, then across the upper chest and into the soft tissue below her sternum. Maya's legs buckled. She didn't cry, didn't growl, didn't make a single sound. But the drool that had been falling steadily into the steel bowl suddenly thickened, and she drove her face so hard into the side of Michael's jaw that he had to brace his footing to stay upright. Green stopped, pressed again, gently, precisely, 2 inches left of center on her upper abdomen. Same response. Legs trembling. Face buried. Silence where a lesser dog would have screamed. "Lower the syringe," Green said. The technician behind him hesitated. "Lower it now." His voice carried no drama, just the flat, absolute certainty of a man who has just caught himself about to make an irreversible mistake. He straightened up and looked at Michael directly. "This isn't organ failure. A dog in systemic decline doesn't respond to localized pressure like that." He pulled off the glove. "She's not refusing to eat because she's dying. She's refusing because swallowing hurts too much to survive." What the X-ray showed. The X-ray took 11 minutes. Michael spent them in the hallway, back against the wall, arms crossed over his chest in the posture of a man holding himself physically together. Officers from the waiting room had filtered out by now, back to shifts, back to lives, back to the practiced normalcy that first responders used to survive the unbearable. Sergeant Briggs had squeezed Michael's shoulder on the way out without saying anything. It was the right call. Dr. Green appeared in the doorway and held it open without a word. The light board was already on. The image was damning in the way that simple things are damning, not complicated, not ambiguous, not open to interpretation. A jagged fragment, white bright against the gray anatomy surrounding it, lodged at the junction of Maya's esophagus and stomach lining. Irregular edges, dense composition. A shard of something that had no business being inside a living animal. Green stepped forward and traced its outline with one finger. Then he indicated the dark, thread-like structure running within millimeters of its sharpest edge. "Major vessel," he said quietly. "She's been carrying this for approximately 6 weeks based on the tissue response around it." He paused. "She's been working like this for 6 weeks, Michael." Michael stared at the image. He stared at the precise location of the fragment, throat level, upper chest, the exact trajectory of something that had been meant for him on the floor of a condemned warehouse on Delman Street. He stared at it for a long time. Then he sat down on the floor of the examination room, slowly, deliberately, like a building settling into its foundation, put his face in both hands, and stayed there. Green didn't move, didn't speak. Some moments required a witness, not a response. She flatlined at 11:08. They wouldn't let him in. He knew they wouldn't. He hadn't asked. He simply found the section of hallway closest to the doors, lowered himself onto the bench against the wall, planted his elbows on his knees, and fixed his eyes on a scuff mark on the floor tiles directly opposite him. The clinic moved around him. Phones rang. A technician wheeled a cart past him and offered a paper cup of coffee he didn't touch. Somewhere down the corridor a dog was barking in short, anxious bursts. Michael heard none of it with any part of himself that was still functioning. He watched the scuff mark and he waited. At 11:08 a.m., the door swung open hard. A nurse moved through it fast, not running, but close, the particular urgent walk of someone who needed to be somewhere 30 seconds ago. She didn't look at Michael. That was how he knew. The flat tone came through the door before it swung shut behind her. Michael was on his feet before he'd made the decision to stand. A hand hit his chest, firm, centered, unmovable. The surgical technician who'd prepped Maya an hour ago. Young, steady eyes. "They're working," she said. "Let them work." He didn't push forward, but he didn't sit back down. He stood at the closed door with the technician's hand still lightly against his chest, and he listened to the unbroken tone, and he counted. 4 minutes. 20 seconds. 40. For minutes and 30 seconds after it began, the tone fractured, stuttered, and broke into rhythm. Unsteady at first, then steadier. From inside the someone exhaled, long and slow and completely involuntary, loud enough to hear through a closed door. Michael's knees nearly went. The first tail wag. They let him in at 5:47 a.m. The recovery room was small and quietly lit, the kind of deliberate dimness that felt less like ambience and more like mercy. Maya was on a padded table at the center of it, intubated, bandaged from throat to mid-chest, connected to a monitor that beeped in the slow, steady rhythm of something that had decided to keep going despite being given every reason not to. Michael pulled the chair close and sat down. He didn't speak, didn't stroke her fur or lean in to whisper the kinds of things people say when they need the other person to know how close it was. He simply reached out and placed his hand over her paw, carefully, the way you handle something that has already been through enough, and stayed there. The monitor beeped. Dawn pressed gray and tentative against the single window above the supply shelf. Michael watched her breathe. For a long moment, there was nothing beyond that, just the breathing, and the beeping, and the specific exhaustion of a man who had been holding himself at full tension for nearly 2 days straight, and had run completely out of the will to keep doing it. Then the tip of Maya's tail moved. Once. Slow and deliberate. A single sweep against the blanket, barely there, barely anything at all. Michael laughed. It came out broken and gasping, and completely beyond his control. The laugh of a man who had been granted permission, finally, to come apart. His shoulders dropped. His free hand came up to cover his mouth. His eyes closed. He laughed until it turned into something else entirely. Maya's tail moved again. Slow. Steady. Still working. Still present. Still his partner, telling him, in the only language she had ever needed, that she wasn't finished yet. She walked out on her own. 10 days later, Maya walked out on her own. Not fast. Not with the coiled, electric readiness she carried into the field on a normal morning. But steady, each step placed with the quiet deliberateness of an animal that understood exactly what it had come back from and had chosen, with full awareness, to come back anyway. Dr. Green held the front door open. He didn't say anything. He'd said what needed saying 3 days ago when he cleared her for discharge and called it, in 20 years of practice, one of the cleaner miracles he'd witnessed. The officers were waiting outside. The same ones who had stood in the waiting room 10 days prior, looking at their shoes, facing walls, losing quiet battles with their composure. They were in uniform now, most of them, standing in a loose, unplanned semicircle in the morning light the way people gather when they don't want to admit they gathered. Someone started clapping. Others followed. Someone in the back said her name. Maya paid them no particular attention. She moved through the semicircle with calm, purposeful indifference, not unkind, simply focused, and found Michael at the center of it. She crossed to his left side, lowered herself into a sit beside his knee, and looked up at him with the same steady, patient expression she'd worn outside his kennel gate on day 11 of 6 weeks that had changed both their lives. Michael reached down and clipped her leash. His jaw was set. It had been set since the moment he'd stood up from the floor of that examination room and looked at the X-ray for the last time. But it wasn't grief holding it there anymore. Someone had filed a careless report 6 weeks ago on Delman Street. Someone had logged a fragment that nearly killed his partner as a minor abrasion and moved on with their day. Michael intended to find out exactly who. And he intended to make absolutely certain it never happened again. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. More stories are coming, and you won't want to miss the next one. I'll see you in next story.